It's time for the mailbag, and I'm excited to dive into your questions from our live show that airs on Thursday afternoons. Let's get started. They're curious about Tua Tagovailoa's recovery from his recent injury and whether there's a chance that Quinn Ewers could be a bust in the draft. They also asked about the possibility of a trade between the Falcons and the Vikings, swapping Kirk Cousins for Jalen Ramsey. Honestly, if the Vikings hadn't signed Zach Wilson, I'd say there might be a slim chance of that happening. But with Wilson in the mix, I'd put that trade at almost 0%. It's an interesting idea, though, definitely a fantasy football scenario rather than a realistic trade. I appreciate the creativity behind your question. Next, we have a question from Archangel about the safety position. Let's take a quick look at the Falcons' safety depth chart. It's important to note that this lineup can change as players might switch positions, moving from cornerback to safety or vice versa. As for who might get cut, I think Jesse Bates and Richie Grant are safe bets to stay on the roster. That leaves Jordan Fuller and DeMarco Hellams in a bit of a battle with some other players. Fuller was signed to a low-cost one-year deal, so the team isn't heavily invested in him financially. If an undrafted free agent or someone like Benny Sapp really impresses during training camp, Fuller could find himself on the chopping block. And if Hellams doesn't bounce back from his ankle injury as expected, he might be in trouble too. It's going to be an interesting competition to watch. First, someone asked about which players might get cut from the roster. For now, I believe all 4 of the players in question will make the 53-man roster. Moving on, there's a question about Kyle Pitts and how effective he'll be this season. I recently watched a highlight from one of his earlier games where he made an incredible catch against the Bills, turning upfield and powering through a defender. I think Pitts will continue to be a solid contributor, similar to what we've seen over the past 3 years. He's been steadily increasing his touchdown count, but I don't expect him to hit the 1,000-yard mark this year. With Charlie Warner starting to emerge in passing situations, I see Pitts finishing the season with around 800 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns. Next up, there's a question about Michael Penix Jr. I'm really optimistic about him. Coming out of Washington, he was one of my favorite quarterbacks in that draft class. If he were in this year's draft, I believe he would have been the top pick without much debate. I expect Penix to have a productive season, throwing for about 30,800 yards with 22 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Now let's talk about how the Falcons might use Jalen Carter in his rookie season. Defensive coordinator Jeff Ulrich has indicated that they plan to utilize him as an edge rusher, specifically as an outside linebacker. Personally, I thought they might start him as an inside linebacker and then shift him to the edge on passing downs. This way, they could maximize their pass rush with all their best players on the field. However, given his size, there might be a learning curve for him as an NFL edge rusher. I could see him finishing the season with around 3.5 to 4 sacks, but he'll likely make valuable contributions in coverage and run defense, ensuring that everyone else is doing their job. While his production might not be eye-popping in year 1, I expect him to improve as he gets more comfortable in his role. Lastly, there's a question about the possibility of the Falcons trading for Kayvon Thibodeau. The Giants recently picked up his 5th-year option, and he had a strong sophomore season with 11.5 sacks and 12 tackles for loss. Although he took a step back last year with 5.5 sacks, it's worth noting that he missed some time due to injury. If he had played a full 17 games, he might have been closer to 9 sacks. However, I don't think the Giants are actively looking to trade him, especially since they've committed to his fully guaranteed contract for next year. So, while it's an intriguing thought, it seems unlikely to happen. The chances of a trade for Kayvon Thibodeau are looking very slim. The Giants likely wanted to see if they could get a 3rd-round pick for him during the draft, but there were no takers. Since the Falcons didn't have a 3rd-round pick to offer, it's hard to see how a deal could happen. Maybe if they could offer a 3rd-round pick in next year's draft, it might be possible, but at that point, it would mean Terry Fontenot would have traded away the 1st, 3rd, and 5th-round picks for next year. So I'd say the likelihood of Thibodeau coming to Atlanta is very low. What do you think? Would you trade for the former top 10 draft pick? Let me know by commenting a Y for yes or an N for no. Now let's move on to the next question. How many total sacks do you think the Falcons will get this year? Last season, they recorded 31 sacks. I'm predicting that Atlanta will reach 40 sacks this year, which is an increase of 9. That's just about an extra half sack per game, which seems reasonable. While I won't go as far as to say they'll hit nearly 50 sacks, the additions of players like Calais Campbell, Jalen Carter, and Lorenzo Carter, along with the departure of Grady Jarrett, should help boost their numbers. So I'm sticking with 40 sacks for the season. Before we dive into more questions, I want to mention that if you're interested in getting a Jalen Carter or James Pierce jersey, there's a link available. It's a great way to support the channel while snagging a Falcons jersey from Fanatics. Check the comments and description for the link, and don't miss out on being the first to show up at your tailgate or watch party with a fresh Falcons jersey. Now let's get back to the mailbag. A question came in about Nick Nash and whether he'll see significant playing time. Honestly, I don't think so. He's an undrafted free agent out of San Jose State who started as a quarterback before making the switch. While he's one of the better UDFA signings, I don't see him getting much action. Last year, players like Cadillo Hodge and Casey Washington looked promising in preseason, but didn't see much offensive playtime. When the season starts, it's going to be Drake London and Darnell Mooney leading the way, with a few snaps for Ray Mloud. Unless there's an injury, I don't see Nash getting significant snaps. Next, Aiden Stackhouse asked about predicting the stats for James Pierce Jr. and Jalen Carter this year. I'd go with 4 sacks for Jalen Carter and 6.5 sacks for James Pierce. For rookies, those numbers are solid. Carter is transitioning to a new position as an outside linebacker, and for Pierce, getting 6.5 sacks in his first year would be a great start. Finally, Kennard Drake asked who I'm looking forward to returning from injured reserve. DeMarco Helms was on IR last season, but the Falcons were fortunate not to be too plagued by injuries. Brillon Trice is another name that comes to mind. We don't know much about him yet, but I'm curious to see what he can bring to the team. First, there's a question about trading a third-round pick from last year for Jalen Ramsey. A Falcons fan suggested sending Tyler Allgeier and a 2026 third-round pick for Ramsey and a 2026 fourth-round pick. However, I think the Dolphins are pretty set at running back. They drafted a running back, Jalen Wright, in the second round last year, and they also have Devin Achane, Alexander Madison, and Oren Gordon on their roster. While they do like to run the ball in that Shanahan system, I don't see a running back being the key piece they're looking for. Adding a third-round pick might help, but it probably won't be enough to sway the Dolphins. I want to give a shout-out to E. Hygo for sending in a $20 super chat. I appreciate your ambition and positivity. However, I'm not quite convinced that building a dynasty hinges on a fourth-round safety. But hey, I admire your enthusiasm. Next, AFX asked about some cuts, but I'm not entirely sure what they were referring to. If you're looking for specific information, I'd recommend checking in with your local veterinarian for that answer. We have a couple more super chats to address. Kennard Drake mentioned a mock draft for 2026. If the Falcons are looking to replace Caleb McGarry, I could see them going for an offensive tackle. Tight end could also be a possibility if they decide to move on from Kyle Pitts, but I think tackle is more likely since that position tends to go in the first round more often than tight end. And to wrap things up, Tony Romo chimed in, but I have to remind him that this is the mailbag. I appreciate the humor, Tony. Keep working on your golf game. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll catch up with everyone later for more Falcons news and rumors.